Cool for Whatnots, Chapter 19. Josie with her own discovery. Josie rocketed down the stairs of her apartment building. Her father's apartment was on the third floor, and there was no elevator. So she was just as used to climbing up and down stairs in the summertime as during the school year. But tonight she had no patience with them. "Josie!" her dad called behind her, racing after her. "Where are you going?" "I saw—" Josie was too out of breath to explain. "I'll tell you later. For now, she had to get down to the street before the girl she'd seen was gone. I'm probably wrong. It probably wasn't her, but it certainly looked like Ivy. Of all the Whatnots Josie and Max had gone to school with, Ivy was the one Josie noticed the most. She was the one who seemed the least like a Whatnot. The first day of kindergarten, when Josie and Ivy were both in the bathroom washing their hands before lunch, Ivy had looked over sideways and shyly asked, "What are you?" And Josie was instantly shot through with dread. Could Ivy tell Josie wasn't a Whatnot? Had Josie already failed so badly at pretending to be a robot, pretending to be a child, that even a Whatnot like Ivy figured it out right away? For once, Josie was speechless. "I mean, what group are you in?" Ivy clarified. "Oh," Josie said calmly, as if she recovered from panic attacks all the time. "Eagle. Me and Max both." The teacher had divided them all into groups with bird names, and every week a different group would get to soar down to lunch and recess first. That was all Ivy was asking about. "You're an eagle?" Ivy repeated. She sounded truly disappointed, not just machine voice disappointed. "I'm a dove." Both girls looked down at their chubby little kid hands until under the shared faucet. Josie's normally pale skin had turned a little rosy from the hot water, while Ivy's skin was so beautifully dark it made Josie think of the black velvet curtains in the school auditorium. For a moment, Josie forgot everything she'd been told about pretending to be a Whatnot. She just acted like a little girl who wanted to make a new friend, which was what she really was. "You're pretty," Josie said. She beamed at Ivy. "And I like your barrettes. I like the little smiley faces on them." "My mama gave them to me," Ivy said. Something in her face shut down. "It doesn't matter. You're just a Whatnot." Josie swallowed hard. "Right," she said, "and you're just a Whatnot too." Sometimes it was hard to remember that with any of the Whatnots, but especially Ivy. Ivy always drew the most beautiful artwork. Her specialty was fairy tale palaces covered in leafy vines that perfectly matched Ivy's name. In third grade, when everyone wanted to play tetherball at recess, Ivy was the reigning champion, and when Josie forgot herself and grumped, "I'll never be as good as you," Ivy said, with what sounded like true kindness, "It's only because I'm tallest. You're actually better at jumping." And when they had to do social studies group projects with 3 people, Josie always suggested she and Max ask Ivy. Max probably thought it was just because she was best at drawing maps and other illustrations, but Josie also liked how Ivy would sit there so quietly while Max and Josie ping-ponged ideas back and forth. And then, when they ran out of steam, she'd speak up with the best idea at all. "So, you want to act out that scene from history?" Or, "So, if everyone else is writing about kings of England, we should do the Queen's." Once late at night, early on in kindergarten, after Josie had already hung up from talking to her dad for the evening, there had been a moment when the school felt unbearably big and quiet and empty, and Josie still felt too wide awake, and she'd crawled out of her little room and knocked on the charging station drawer she knew belonged to Ivy. If Ivy had poked her head out, Josie planned to say, "I'm not really a Whatnot. Let's pretend you aren't one either. Let's just be friends, and I can be friends with both you and Max." But Ivy hadn't answered the knock that night, and Josie never tried again. Because Ivy was a Whatnot. Ivy needed to spend all night, every night, cradled in the charging station, or she wouldn't be able to do anything. Ivy's probably locked up at the charging station right now, back at school, like all the other Whatnots, or back at the factory, being upgraded so she'll look even taller and bigger and like a 6th grader instead of a 5th grader. So it was foolish that Josie was sprinting down the stairs, but she kept going. She burst out onto the street and jerked her gaze side to side. The sidewalks were still crowded with workers like Josie's dad, just now arriving home from their jobs in other parts of the city. Parents carried hungry little kids who reached out for the gleaming apples and peaches of the sidewalk stands. And then, above the crowd far down the block, Josie saw a tall woman whose skin was the same deep, dark, velvety shade as Ivy's. Josie raced after her, dodging sharp elbows and jutting knees. And there, beside the tall woman, was Ivy. With one hand, Ivy was holding onto the tall woman's purse strap. With the other, Ivy was wiping a little boy's face. The little boy gazed up at her adoringly. And Ivy was transformed. The quiet, dreamy, well-behaved Ivy from school was chattering away excitedly to the tall woman breaking off the words. And then we learned, the instant she saw Josie. For a moment, the two girls just stood there staring at each other. And then Josie said, "You're not a whatnot. You never were a whatnot." Ivy stared back at her with wide, startled eyes and whispered, "Neither were you." Chapter 20. The narrators aside. Wait, what? Ivy wasn't a whatnot either? There were more real kids besides Josie pretending to be androids pretending to be kids? Don't look at me like this to explain it. It's a surprise to me, too. Chapter 21. Back at Max's house. "Max, I'm so sorry," Mom said. She had tears in her eyes. "We didn't mean to traumatize you. This isn't how I imagined this going." She laid a soothing hand on his arm, and Max jerked away. He lost his balance and almost fell, kicking the wall in his effort to remain upright. That felt so good he kicked it again. "She's real!" another cook. "Josie's real!" "Stop that!" Dad said, pulling Max away from the wall. He settled himself down onto the couch. "Get a hold of yourself." Max had never wanted to hit or punch or kick another person in his entire life, but he wanted to punch his own father now. That confused Max too. He threw himself flat on the couch and sobbed into the pillows. And this illustrates why we tell parents to wait until their kids have socialized with other children like them before revealing the truth about whatnots, the mystery woman said. It's easier to come to terms with outgrowing the shallow friendships of early childhood once they have more mature friendships. Max understood every word she said: friendship, truth, mature, even socialized, but it felt like she was speaking a foreign language. No, not just a foreign language, but a foreign language underwater, and backward, and upside down. "Oh, Max," Mom sighed. She sat beside him on the couch, a fact that Max was only aware of because he felt the couch cushion dip down. She began stroking his hair, smoothing each individual curl. Normally Max loved it when Mom did that, but now this made him furious with her too. "This will all make more sense to you later," Mom began, "but think of the whatnots, like training wheels on a bike, only they were training wheels for friendship. You won't understand this yet, and I'm glad you can't understand this yet, but real human friends don't always treat others as kindly as you and Josie do. People make mistakes. Kids make mistakes. Kids especially. They say and do hurtful things. They can break your heart. Childhood friendships can be so brutal. We didn't want you to have to go through that. And we didn't want you to learn bad habits and start thinking it was okay for you to be mean to other kids because that's what you saw them doing." "So you're going to be mean to me?" Max wailed into the giant pillow on the couch. He turned his face to the side, appealing to Mom, even though he was too teary-eyed to actually see her. "By taking away Josie, my best friend?" "Max, please," Dad said. His voice seemed to come from far away, farther than just across the room. "Pull yourself together. We already told you she's not real." "He's going to need some time to digest this," Nurse Beverly said, almost as if Dad were Max's age, and Nurse Beverly was scolding Dad. "I don't see why you couldn't have a final meeting with Josie," Mom said, still stroking Max's hair, "to say goodbye, or—" "Actually, that is expressly forbidden in these circumstances," the mystery woman said, sounding as brisk and disinterested as if they were discussing drawing paint. "Now that he knows the truth about whatnots, surely you read the terms of the agreement when you signed it years ago." "But—" Mom began. "Okay, fine. We'll get our attorneys to find the loopholes," Dad said, biting off his words. "We'll make arrangements." Max liked that Dad sounded so fierce on Max's behalf. Of course Dad could fix this. "There are no loopholes," the mystery woman said calmly. "No arrangements like that would be allowed. To quote section 32, line 45 of the document you both signed, Once a child has been told about his whatnot upbringing, no further contact with the whatnots he was raised with shall be allowed. How could Mom and Dad not be able to fix this? How could they have signed such a horrible contract? How could any of it matter if Josie wasn't real? She's real. She's real. I know she is. She has to be. We have to stay friends. Max rose up from the couch. Stop it! He roared. Stop talking, all of you! Stop saying I can't see Josie. Just leave me alone! But that wasn't what he really wanted either. Chapter 22. Josie questioning. Josie and Ivy were still standing stock still on the sidewalk, staring at one another in shock, when Josie's dad caught up with her. He'd evidently run after her the whole way down the stairs and along the street. She hadn't been paying attention, but apparently he'd been shouting, Josie, Josie, wait! The entire time. He was out of breath. Dad, this is my friend Ivy, Josie said. The word friend just slipped out. I didn't know she lived near us, but... What she wanted to say to him was too big to put into words. A friend? From, Dad panted. From school? Ivy's mother asked, her eyes widening. If Josie hadn't known any better, she would have said Ivy's mother was afraid. But what was there to be afraid of? I signed an agreement, Dad said to Ivy's mother. Did you sign an agreement? Still wide-eyed, Ivy's mother nodded. This isn't allowed, Dad said. We'll get in trouble. We'll lose everything. He began tugging on Josie's arm. We'll stay off this street from now on, Ivy's mother said, her eyes locking on Dad's. She started pulling Ivy's arm, too, pulling her and the little boy away from Dad and Josie. The crowd swirled around them, creating eddies and islands. It wasn't just that Dad and Ivy's mom kept yanking Josie and Ivy in opposite directions. The currents of the crowd seemed to want them apart, too. But just before they lost sight of each other, Ivy darted forward and whispered in Josie's ear, 1511 Saw Fallen Street, apartment 601. She leaves for work at noon every day. Are there more of us? Josie whispered back. More whatnots who aren't really whatnots, she meant. Because the crowd and the pull of Josie's dad and Ivy's mom, Josie and Ivy were too far apart now to be able to whisper after that. With the hubbub of the crowd around them, they were too far apart to be sure of hearing each other, even if they shouted. So in the last moments before they lost sight of each other, Josie had to resort to reading Ivy's lips. Still, she was certain she understood. Ivy was whispering back, We have to find out. Chapter 23. The narrators aside. Whew! I'm back on solid ground here. With all the talk of agreements, I've read them now. I've examined the fine print. I know what I'm talking about this time. Max really isn't allowed to see Josie ever again. Josie and Ivy really aren't allowed to meet outside of school. But we both know that Josie doesn't always follow the rules. And Max, well, maybe I still don't know what I'm talking about. Chapter 24. Josie deciding what to do. Study hard today, Dad said. Josie blinked groggily up at him. It was the next morning, and Dad was headed off to work. She was still snuggled on her mattress on the floor, and Dad was tucking his own blanket around her for extra warmth. I still can't believe I get to see you every single night from here on out. I won't have to give you up after 3 weeks. Yeah, Josie murmured drowsily. Have a good day at work. I think you're talking in your sleep. Dad laughed and patted her cheek. That's okay. It's still so early. You're a kid. You can sleep late. Now that I don't have to take you to daycare. That was another big change this summer. Dad had decided Josie was old enough to stay home by herself while he worked. Josie snorted. I get to sleep late and study hard? Josie asked. How can I do both at once? You know what I mean, Dad said. Josie could hear the traffic on the street outside. Lots of early morning laborers like her dad were already headed off to work, but he stayed crouched by her mattress a moment longer. Josie, I didn't have a chance to study, he said. When I was your age, I was already working all the time. My family needed the money. I was picking up rocks, pulling up weeds. Before you started building castles in the air, Josie said loyally. This was an old joke between them. Her dad often did work high above the ground, sometimes even trotting across exposed beams and half-built skyscrapers to fix problems left behind by automated cranes. They had enchanted Josie when she was little, but it scared her now. And I know the stories, Dad, Josie said. She was supposed to thank him for everything he'd done for her, for the fact that she didn't have to work all the time. As if everything worked out, she would never have to risk her life for a paycheck like he did. She wanted to thank him, but she didn't want to say the words that were just words, that weren't heartfelt. And her brain was still too scrambled for that. Max? Ivy? Dad? You know what? She said, I don't think I'm awake yet. This is all a dream, right? She flipped over onto her back and made a big show of pretending to be sound asleep and snoring like a chainsaw. Yes, got to have dreams, Dad said softly. Not nightmares. Josie kept her eyes tightly squeezed together. Tell him thank you, she told herself. Say it like you mean it. Say it. Say it. But the undercurrent of, but what about Max? What about Ivy? Still thrummed too strongly in her brain. When she finally opened her eyes again, Dad was already gone. She hadn't told him thank you, but she also hadn't flung the angry words at him that were simmering below the surface. How could you and Ivy's mom have signed those agreements? How could you have promised things about who I was allowed to talk to, what I was allowed to say, where I was allowed to go? How could I not go visit Ivy today? All morning she made bargains with herself. I'll be careful. I don't have a cell phone anymore, so no one could track me electronically. I'll wait until afternoon, so Ivy's mom won't get in trouble either. I really will study this morning, so I'll make Dad happy too. I'll still get into a good school like Dad wants, no matter what. As soon as the local library opened, she went there and dutifully pulled the dullest sounding books off the shelves. Study prep for citywide sixth grade curriculum, middle school entrance examination reviews, rather than the storybooks that called to her instead. But she also sat down at one of the library's computers and called up a city map. Let's see, 1511 Sawfallen Street. She'd just put her hands in position to type the apartment building number when she thought to look around. The library was packed, and nobody seemed to be peering in her direction, but a little dome hung from the ceiling alongside the old-fashioned fluorescent lights. It's probably a security camera. Dad had pointed out security cameras to her once at a museum that they'd gone to when she was little. He said that was how the disembodied voice knew to come on with the warning, "You are standing too close to the artwork. Step back or you will be asked to leave." And he'd said, "They're probably watching us in particular, because we aren't dressed right. We don't talk right. We don't belong here, but you'll belong here when you grow up. You'll fit in." She hadn't understood that at the time. She hadn't understood that he was really saying, "We're poor. Everyone else here is rich." Everyone else in the library branch was poor too. And that was why the library computers were all guarded by security cameras. That was the only reason. But Josie pulled her hands back from the computer keyboard. She stood and then walked up and down the rows of old bookshelves instead, until she came to an ancient book labeled City Maps. It took a long time to look up Sawfallen Street in the index, flip to the proper page, and memorize directions without so much as touching her finger to the page. But it seemed safer, wiser. Promptly at noon, she got up and left the library. She walked 20 blocks. When she got to Ivy's building, she didn't go in the front door. She walked around to the back and pulled a garbage can over to the bottom of the fire escape, and then she began to climb. She was really only looking for an open window, a route into the building, but when she got to the sixth floor, hands reached out of the windows and pulled her in. It wasn't just two hands, it was four. Chapter 25. Max, Deciding What to Do. Max woke up in the morning with swollen, puffy eyelids from crying so much the night before. This had never happened to him before, and at first it confused him. Why are my eyes so hard to open? I'll have to tell Josie about this. Oh, Josie. Everything from the night before flooded back. According to Mom and Dad and the mysterious, strange woman, Josie was something called a whatnot, an android, no more real and human, and and herself than a stuffed animal or toy, or an imaginary friend. According to the adults, Josie basically was an imaginary friend. Of course the two of you got along great, Dad had said. All those whatnots, they were programmed to be like the kind of kids you needed around you most. Your mother and I, we paid to have them designed and programmed that way. And they were supposed to be as realistic as possible, Nurse Beverly had said more gently. So you shouldn't feel embarrassed about feeling foolish. I'm not embarrassed, Max had protested. I'm mad because you all lied to me. I mean, you're lying to me now. He'd felt like he was spinning out of control, like he might do or say anything. If the adults could say such ridiculous things, he could be ridiculous too. That's enough, Dad had said, like he was closing a business deal. We're trusting you with grown-up information. You do not accuse me of lying. Act like you deserve to be treated as an adult. There are all sorts of secrets we kept from you when you were a little kid, all sorts of fantasies we let you believe. As you grow up, you're more ready for the truth. That's how life works. This is the same kind of thing. Take it like a man. But Max felt a new tear squeeze out of his eyes. He heard a rustling over by his drapes. A flood of light splashed over him. Nurse Beverly must have come in and opened his drapes and blinds like she did every morning. She was probably about to say, Rise and shine, her usual greeting. You're not going to tell me it's time to get up, he said sulkily. You're going to act like it's any other day and not. Not the morning after I lost my best friend. The morning after everyone told me my best friend isn't real. Max felt a cool hand on his forehead. He squinted up into the too bright light temporarily blinding him. Go and tell Mom and Dad I'm not going on vacation with them, Max said. Tell them I'm staying here until they bring Josie back. Someone crouched beside his bed. It wasn't Nurse Beverly. It was Mom. Oh, Max, she said, brushing her hair back from his forehead. I don't think any of us are in shape to leave on vacation right now or to enjoy it. We're postponing the trip. You are? Max sat up. Maybe he would get everything he wanted. And Josie? Mom shook her head. Max, I feel terrible about this too, she said. Her hand shook and she dropped it to her side. Terrible about how everything happened. What a bad job we did telling you. Maybe even about the decision we made nearly 12 years ago to raise you around whatnots at all. 12 years ago? Max asked, his voice cracking. You're saying even the kids I knew in preschool were fake? Mom stared down at her knees, folded under her. When you put it that way, Max, we were really trying to help you, Mom said. We really thought this was for the best. She patted his hair again and again, oddly, scrambled up and left the room. Was Mom crying? Max lay still for a moment longer until it became unbearable. Automatically, he reached for his phone to text Josie. He wanted to tell her Mom is acting so weird. He wanted to ask, What do you think I should do to get my parents to let me see you? But last night, the last text he'd gotten from Josie had been weird too. It hadn't sounded like her. She was real. She'd told him that herself. But her text hadn't sounded real. He tapped out a cautious, hesitant message. Hello, Josie? Are you there? Where are you? What are you doing? What do you know about things? The answer came quickly. The phone number no longer belongs to Josie West. All questions about Josie West must be directed to the Whatnot Corporation. Office hours are Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Max dropped the phone as if it had suddenly turned red hot. You'd think they'd at least keep pretending if. No. Josie's existence hadn't been pretending. He would have known. He would have been able to tell if she'd been fake. All those years spent together, all the secrets they'd whispered in each other's ears, all the games they'd played, all the texts they'd sent, all the school projects they'd assembled, everything they'd done together made him an expert on Josie West. She was real. Max sat up, energized. He'd go back to the school. Josie's things had been left by the curb. He'd find an address, if the trash pickers hadn't taken everything. He'd break into the school, if that was what it took to track down Josie. He sprang up and ran out of his room. Halfway down the long second-floor hallway, it came to him that he might be behaving a little strangely. It could have made sense to change out if he changed out of his pajamas. So what, he thought, I don't care. But it seemed like a good idea not to let Mom or Dad see him. When he reached the stairs, he went from running to tiptoeing. Down on the first floor, he was just about to pass the breakfast room when he heard Mom's voice. He flattened himself against the wall. Yes, I'm upset too, she was saying. I feel like we totally messed this up. We should let Max see his friend one last time. Friend? Dad said. It's a machine. But then even his voice turned soft and sad. I already called our attorney, but he says the contract we signed is airtight. Mom sighed. Maybe Maybe we need to expose Max to other friends, she suggested. New friends? You mean more whatnots? Or real kids? Dad asked. Max wanted to storm into the breakfast room and scream, Josie is real! And one friend isn't replaceable with another. People aren't interchangeable. They're not like robots. Max doubled over too much in pain to move, let alone scream at anybody. He let out a whimper that was so soft no one could hear him. Max isn't going to be fooled by whatnots anymore, Dad said. And if you think he should meet up with other kids who already know the truth about whatnots, that would be seventh graders. You want your son, who's upstairs crying right now, hanging out with seventh graders? I was a seventh grader once upon a time. They'd eat Max alive. You were a seventh grader before the invention of whatnots, Mom said weakly. Seventh graders who were raised with whatnots. They'd be nicer. A clink sounded from the breakfast room, as if Dad had put down his fork a little too hard. I bet kids still act like kids, he said. Seventh grade, worst year of my life. And we're going to put Max through that? Mom sounded like she was on the verge of crying again. Sounds like that it's either that or putting him into a hermetically sealed box for the next 4 or 5 years. I'm joking. I'm joking, Dad said. Look, I know last night was awful. I have emotions too, though of course seventh grade taught me how to hide them. And I'm not proud of how I acted when we told Max everything. Take it like a man. Grow up. It's like I opened my mouth and my father's voice came out. But Max is going to have to toughen up. It's a dog eat dog world out there. I know you don't always see it because you want everyone to be nice, but I run an art museum, Mom said, her voice icy now. You may not value what I do, but I deal with all sorts of people with gigantic egos and equally gigantic insecurities. I deal with you when you say ridiculous things like take it like a man. Were Mom and Dad fighting now? Because of Max? They never fought. Or maybe he'd never heard them fight before. Maybe that was something else they'd protected him from. We wanted Max to grow up with the kind of confidence that comes from always being around family and friends who love him, Mom said, her tone turning plaintive. Have we undermined that completely? No, Dad said. Max is still going to come out ahead because he found out about the whatnots at the end of fifth grade, not sixth. He's going to have more time to adjust than the other kids do. The way to look at disadvantage is how can this be turned into an advantage? Max has gotten used to being the top dog at school because he's always had that. He'll have that in middle school too. We've set him up for success just like we wanted, just like any parents want for their kids. Once again, Max wanted to scream at his parents, or maybe just his dad. I'm not a dog. I'm not going to adjust to any place that's dog eat dog. I won't toughen up, and I don't care about succeeding. I care about Josie. But all he could do was stay doubled over, whimpering. He really needed Josie now. Josie would know how to solve everything.